It was a cool, sunny morning, the kind that makes you feel alive and ready for anything. A man who had spent years away from his family decided it was time to reconnect with his daughter. She was growing up so fast, and he didn't want to miss another moment of her life. He got into his old car, the one with the slightly squeaky door, and drove toward the school where she studied. It wasn't just any visit. He had planned this day carefully. In his hand, he held a small gift, something simple but meaningful, a little toy bear wrapped in shiny paper. He hoped it would bring a smile to her face. As he parked near the school gate, he took a deep breath. He felt nervous but also excited. It had been years since he last saw her regularly. Life had taken them down different paths, but now, he was determined to rebuild their bond. Walking up to the entrance, he signed the visitor's log at the front desk. The lady at the desk gave him a polite nod and asked if he needed help finding his way around. He shook his head, saying he'd wait for his daughter outside her classroom. The school hallway buzzed with energy. Kids ran past him laughing and shouting, while teachers tried to keep things under control. The walls were covered with colorful drawings and posters about kindness and teamwork. He couldn't help but smile as he watched the chaos unfold. It reminded him of his own school days, how carefree everything seemed back then. After a few minutes, he spotted her. His heart skipped a beat when he saw her face light up with surprise. "Dad!" she called out, running toward him with open arms. Her voice was filled with joy, and for a moment all his worries disappeared. He hugged her tightly, feeling a mix of emotions, happiness, guilt, and relief, all rolled into one. "I missed you," he said softly, looking into her eyes. She grinned, holding on to the stuffed bear he handed her. "This is awesome. Thank you," she exclaimed, hugging the toy close to her chest. They walked side by side toward the cafeteria, talking about everything under the sun. She told him about her friends, her favorite subjects, and even complained about how hard math homework could be sometimes. He listened intently, nodding and asking questions whenever she paused. For those few minutes, they weren't father and daughter catching up after years apart. They were simply two people enjoying each other's company. When they reached the cafeteria, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The room was large and noisy, with rows of tables filled with kids eating their lunches. Some were sharing snacks, others were chatting loudly, and a few sat quietly, focusing on their food. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But as they moved closer to the serving area, something caught his attention, something that made him pause and take a second look. He noticed that the teacher supervising lunch was handing out meals to the students. Most of the kids received full trays, sandwiches, fruits, juice boxes, and cookies. They looked happy, digging into their food with enthusiasm. But then he saw something strange. Many of the darker-skinned children, including his own daughter, were receiving much smaller portions. Some got only plain bread or half a sandwich with no extras like fruit or drinks. His stomach tightened as he realized what he was witnessing. His daughter didn't say anything about it. She simply accepted the food she was given and found a seat at one of the tables. Watching her try to eat the meager meal without complaining broke his heart. He wanted to march over to the teacher right then and demand answers, but he held himself back. Instead, he sat beside her, pretending everything was fine while his mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Did she think this was normal? And most importantly, why was it happening? After finishing her lunch, she turned to him with a bright smile, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside him. "Can we go play outside now?" she asked eagerly. He forced a smile and nodded, knowing he couldn't spoil her day with his anger. But as they stepped out into the playground, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to end here. He couldn't let it slide, not when it involved his child and so many others like her. Little did he know, this visit to the school would set off a chain of events that would change not only their lives, but also the lives of countless families in the community. It was a story that started with a simple act of love, a father wanting to spend time with his daughter, but soon grew into something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. As the afternoon sun warmed the playground, the man watched his daughter laugh and run around with her friends. She seemed so carefree, completely unaware of the weight that now rested on his shoulders. He tried to push the image of the cafeteria out of his mind for a while, focusing instead on the sound of her giggles and the way her eyes sparkled when she played tag. But no matter how hard he tried, the thought kept creeping back in. The unfairness of it gnawed at him, refusing to let go. When the school bell rang, signaling the end of recess, he walked her back to her classroom. As they said their goodbyes, he knelt down to her level and looked into her eyes. "Did you have fun today?" he asked, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. She nodded enthusiastically, hugging him tightly before rushing inside. For a moment he stood there watching her disappear through the door. Then, with a deep breath, he turned toward the school office. The principal's office was quiet, almost too quiet. A secretary greeted him with a polite smile and asked how she could help. He explained that he needed to speak with the principal about something important. After a brief wait, he was ushered into a small room where the principal sat, behind a desk cluttered with papers and books. The man took a seat across from him, feeling a mix of nerves and determination bubbling inside. "I came here today to visit my daughter," he began, his voice steady but firm. "And during lunch, I noticed something troubling." He went on to describe what he had seen in the cafeteria, the unequal distribution of food between students. Some kids got full meals while others, including his daughter, received much less. His words hung in the air as the principal listened, his expression unreadable. When he finished speaking, the principal leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I understand your concern," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "But I assure you this must have been an oversight by the staff. We treat all our students equally, without exception." The response felt dismissive, like a brush-off meant to shut down further discussion. It made the man's blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm. "That may be true," he replied, his tone measured but firm. "But if it's just an oversight, then shouldn't we make sure it doesn't happen again? And if it's not—" He let the sentence trail off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. The principal shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly uneasy about the direction of the conversation. After a long pause, he promised to look into the matter and thanked the man for bringing it to his attention. Walking out of the office, the man felt frustrated and unsatisfied. He knew the principal hadn't taken him seriously. There was no real commitment to addressing the issue, no sense of urgency. It was as though his concerns were being swept under the rug, ignored because they didn't fit the narrative of how things were supposed to work. But he wasn't about to give up, not when it involved his child and so many others who deserved better. That evening, he sat alone in his living room, replaying the events of the day in his mind. He thought about the look on his daughter's face when she accepted her lunch without question. He thought about the other children who might feel the same way, too young or too scared to speak up. And he thought about the principal's empty promises which did nothing to ease his growing anger. Something had to change, but what could he do? Then it hit him. If the school wouldn't take action, maybe someone else would. Someone who could hold them accountable. Picking up his phone, he hesitated for a moment before dialing 911. It wasn't the kind of call people usually made, but he believed it was necessary. When the operator answered, he explained the situation as clearly and calmly as he could. He described what he had witnessed, emphasizing the inequality and the potential harm it caused. The operator listened carefully, assuring him that the appropriate authorities would investigate. Hanging up the phone, he felt a mix of relief and apprehension. On one hand, he was glad he had taken a stand. On the other, he worried about what might come next. Would people understand why he did it? Or would they criticize him for making such a big deal out of something so seemingly small? These questions swirled in his mind as he prepared for bed, unsure of how the next few days would unfold. The next morning, news of the complaint spread quickly through the school community. Teachers whispered in the hallways, parents exchanged concerned glances during drop-off, and students overheard fragments of conversations they didn't fully understand. By lunchtime, Local officials arrived to conduct an investigation. They spoke with teachers, students, and parents, gathering information to piece together what had happened. The cafeteria became the center of attention, with everyone wondering whether the accusations were true. For the man, the investigation brought a mix of emotions. Relief washed over him knowing that action was finally being taken. But there was also fear. Fear of backlash, of judgment, of putting his daughter in an uncomfortable position. Still, he reminded himself why he had done it. This wasn't just about one meal. It was about fairness, respect, and ensuring that every child felt valued and cared for. Those principles mattered more than anything else. As the week went on, the story gained traction beyond the school walls. Local news outlets picked it up, shining a spotlight on the issue of inequality in education. Parents from neighboring schools reached out, sharing their own experiences and frustrations. What started as a personal grievance quickly grew into a larger movement, with people uniting to demand change. For the first time, the man realized the power of speaking up, not just for himself but for others who couldn't find their voices. Despite the challenges ahead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This journey had begun with a simple desire to reconnect with his daughter, but it had transformed into something far greater. He knew the road to justice wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to walk it, one step at a time. The days following the investigation felt like a whirlwind. The school, once a quiet and predictable place, suddenly became the center of attention. Reporters stood outside the gates, microphones in hand, asking teachers and parents for comments. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones at pickup time, with some people nodding in agreement while others crossed their arms defensively. It was clear that not everyone saw eye to eye on what had happened, or even if it was worth all the fuss. For the man's life took on a new rhythm. He found himself fielding calls from reporters who wanted to hear his side of the story. At first, he hesitated. Talking to strangers about something so personal felt strange, almost invasive. But then he remembered why he had spoken up in the first place, not for fame or attention, but because he believed in fairness. So when a local journalist asked him to share his experience, he agreed, making sure to keep the focus on the bigger picture rather than just his own feelings. During the interview, he spoke plainly and honestly. "I didn't expect this to blow up the way it did," he admitted, leaning forward slightly as though confiding in an old friend. "All I wanted was for my kid, and every other kid, to be treated fairly. Food shouldn't depend on the color of someone's skin. That's not how it should work." His words resonated with many people, sparking conversations far beyond the school grounds. Parents began sharing stories of similar experiences they'd noticed but never addressed. Some talked about unequal treatment during sports tryouts. Others mentioned biased remarks made by staff members. Slowly, a pattern emerged, one that couldn't be ignored any longer. Meanwhile, inside the school, tensions ran high. Teachers were caught between doing their jobs and defending themselves against accusations they didn't fully understand. Some genuinely hadn't realized there was an issue. Others seemed defensive, insisting they treated all students equally. The principal, once calm and collected, now looked visibly stressed. He called emergency meetings with the staff, urging them to cooperate with investigators and show transparency. But behind closed doors, rumors swirled about who might have been responsible for the uneven distribution of food. The cafeteria staff, often overlooked and underappreciated, became the focal point of scrutiny. They worked tirelessly to prepare meals each day, yet now they faced questions about choices they claimed they hadn't made. One of the lunch aides, a kind woman in her 50s who always greeted kids with a warm smile, broke down in tears during an interview. "We're just following instructions," she said, wiping her eyes. "Nobody tells us why certain trays go where they do. We're just trying to get through the day." As more details came to light, the community grew divided. Some parents rallied around the idea of change, organizing meetings to discuss ways to improve equality in schools. Others dismissed the claims as exaggerated, arguing that mistakes happen and labeling the situation as overblown. Social media exploded with opinions, turning what started as a small act of advocacy into a heated debate. For the man, Scrolling through these comments was both heartening and disheartening. On one hand, he saw countless messages of support from people thanking him for standing up. On the other, he encountered harsh criticism from those who accused him of causing unnecessary drama. Through it all, his daughter remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. She continued going to school, playing with her friends, and coming home with stories about her day. Her innocence was a source of comfort for him, a reminder that children shouldn't have to carry the weight of adult problems. Still, he knew he had to tread carefully. He didn't want her to feel singled out or embarrassed because of what he had done. So, whenever she asked why reporters kept calling or why people kept talking about their family, he kept his answers simple. Sometimes grown-ups need to fix things, he told her gently. And that's what we're doing. Despite the chaos, progress began to take shape. Local officials released a preliminary report confirming that disparities in meal distribution had indeed occurred. While they stopped short of calling it intentional discrimination, the findings sparked outrage and renewed calls for action. School board meetings, usually sparsely attended, overflowed with concerned citizens demanding accountability. Parents, teachers, and even students voiced their thoughts, creating a rare moment of unity in the face of adversity. One evening, the man attended one of these meetings. Sitting in the back row, he listened as person after person stood up to speak. A young boy no older than 10 bravely addressed the crowd, saying, "It's not fair when some kids don't get enough food. We're all hungry the same." His words brought murmurs of agreement from the audience, followed by applause. The man felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't just about policies or procedures anymore. It was about humanity, about ensuring that every child felt seen, heard, and valued. Inspired by the growing momentum, the man decided to take his efforts further. Alongside a group of like-minded parents, he helped organize workshops focused on addressing bias and promoting inclusivity within schools. These sessions brought together teachers, administrators, and community members to learn, listen, and grow. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. People started recognizing the subtle ways inequality could creep into everyday practices, whether it was through food distribution, classroom interactions, or disciplinary actions. Change didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks, misunderstandings, and moments of frustration, but each small victory fueled their determination to keep pushing forward. New guidelines were introduced to ensure equal treatment for all students, regardless of background. Teachers underwent training to better understand cultural sensitivity and unconscious bias. And perhaps most importantly, open lines of communication were established, giving parents and students a platform to voice concerns without fear of judgment. Looking back, the man realized how far they had come since that fateful day in the cafeteria. What started as a personal observation had blossomed into a movement, a testament to the power of speaking up and standing together. He knew the journey wasn't over, and likely never would be. Inequality was a complex issue with deep roots, requiring constant vigilance and effort. But for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. Hopeful that his daughter, and every child, would grow up in a world where fairness wasn't just an ideal but a reality. And as he tucked her into bed one night, watching her drift off to sleep with a peaceful expression on her face, he whispered softly, "We're building a better world for you, sweetheart. One step at a time." As the weeks passed, the man found himself spending more time than ever thinking about fairness and justice. It wasn't just a concept anymore. It had become a mission. Every morning, he woke up with a sense of purpose, knowing that his actions were part of something bigger. But it wasn't easy. The road to change was bumpy, filled with challenges that tested his patience and resolve. Still, he reminded himself why he started this journey: for his daughter, for her friends, and for every child who deserved to be treated equally. One of the hardest parts was dealing with criticism. Not everyone in the community supported what he had done. Some parents accused him of stirring up trouble, saying things like, "Why are you making such a big deal out of one meal?" Or, "This is just how schools operate. Why can't you leave well enough alone?" At first, these comments stung. He wondered if maybe they were right, if maybe he should have stayed quiet and let things slide. But then he thought about his daughter sitting in that cafeteria, accepting a smaller portion without complaint because she didn't know any better. That image kept him going, pushing aside doubts and fears. To cope with the negativity, he leaned on the growing network of supporters around him. Parents who shared his concerns reached out, offering words of encouragement and practical help. They organized meetings at local libraries and community centers, brainstorming ways to keep the momentum alive. Together, they drafted petitions, wrote letters to school officials, and even held peaceful rallies outside the school gates. Each small step felt like progress, a reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. The rallies, in particular, brought a sense of unity to the group. Families gathered on weekends, holding handmade signs with messages like "Fairness for all kids and equality starts here." Children joined in too, their tiny hands clutching balloons or waving flags. The atmosphere was hopeful, almost celebratory, despite the seriousness of the issue. Neighbors passing by stopped to ask questions, some joining in while others simply nodded in solidarity. For the man, seeing so many people come together gave him strength. It showed him that when people cared enough to stand up, real change was possible. But alongside the victories came setbacks. There were moments when it felt like nothing was moving forward. School board meetings dragged on for hours with little progress made. Officials promised reforms but often failed to follow through. Teachers, caught between conflicting demands, expressed frustration over unclear instructions. Even some of the parents who initially supported the cause began to lose steam, worn down by the slow pace of change. During one particularly tough meeting, the man sat quietly, listening as voices rose in frustration. One mother stood up, tears streaming down her face, and said, "I'm tired of fighting. I just want my kids to go to school without worrying about being treated differently." Her words struck a chord with everyone in the room. For a moment there was silence, a shared understanding of how exhausting the battle could be. But then another parent spoke up, softly but firmly. "We're all tired," she said, "but giving up won't make things better. We owe it to our kids to keep trying." Those words stayed with him long after the meeting ended. They reminded him that persistence mattered, even when the path ahead seemed uncertain. He realized that change didn't happen overnight. It required patience, resilience, and a willingness to keep showing up, day after day. So, he decided to focus on the small wins, no matter how insignificant they might seem. A new policy introduced. Here, a training session held there. Each step counted toward building a fairer system. At home, his daughter noticed the toll the situation was taking on him. She wasn't fully aware of everything happening behind the scenes, but she could tell something was weighing on his mind. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching TV, she turned to him and asked, "Are you okay, Dad? You look really tired lately." Her question caught him off guard. He hadn't expected her to pick up on his stress, but then again, kids were more observant than adults gave them credit for. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he said, pulling her closer. "Just working on some grown-up stuff, but don't worry, it's all going to be worth it." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer, and snuggled into his side. In that moment, he felt a surge of gratitude for her innocence, her trust, and the chance to make the world a little kinder for her generation. The turning point came during a special assembly at the school. After months of pressure from parents and officials, the administration finally agreed to address the issue publicly. Students, teachers, and parents packed into the gymnasium, filling the space with murmurs of anticipation. When the principal stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. He began by acknowledging the concerns raised and apologizing for any harm caused. Then he announced several new measures aimed at ensuring equality in the school, from revising meal distribution policies to implementing mandatory diversity training for staff. As the principal spoke, the man felt a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and cautious optimism. This wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a significant milestone. Later, when the event concluded and families spilled out into the parking lot, he overheard snippets of conversation. "About time. one dad muttered under his breath. A mom nearby nodded, adding, "It's a start anyway." These reactions reassured him that the community was ready to move forward, even if there was still work to be done. In the days that followed, the changes began to take effect. Cafeteria trays now carried equal portions for every student, regardless of background. Teachers started incorporating discussions about fairness and inclusion into their lessons, encouraging students to think critically about the world around them. And perhaps most importantly, an open-door policy was established, inviting parents and students to share feedback directly with administrators. For the man, these developments marked a new chapter, not just for the school, but for his relationship with his daughter. Their bond grew stronger as he continued to show her through his actions the importance of standing up for what's right. She may not have understood all the details, but she saw how much he cared, and that was enough. Late one night, as he tucked her into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes and said, "You're a good dad, you know that?" He chuckled softly, brushing a kiss on her forehead. "Thanks, kiddo," he replied, "and you're a pretty great kid." As he turned off the light and closed her bedroom door, he felt a deep sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, but for now, they were headed in the right direction, together. The changes in the school didn't happen all at once, but over time they became noticeable. It started small, a new sign in the cafeteria reminding staff to distribute meals equally, or a teacher pausing during class to talk about kindness and fairness. These little shifts might have seemed insignificant on their own, but together, they added up to something bigger. Parents who had been skeptical at first began to see that the efforts were genuine. Even some of the critics softened their stance, admitting that maybe, just maybe, things were heading in the right direction. For the man, these signs of progress brought both relief and renewed determination. He knew better than to think the work was done. Change like this wasn't a one-time fix. It required constant attention and care, like tending to a garden. If you stopped watering it, the plants would wither. So he stayed involved, attending meetings, checking in with teachers, and keeping an eye on how things unfolded in the cafeteria. He wanted to make sure the promises made weren't just empty words. They needed to stick. One afternoon, as he picked his daughter up from school, she ran up to him holding a colorful drawing. "Look what we did today," she said excitedly, thrusting the paper into his hands. The picture showed a group of kids sitting at a table, each with a plate full of food. Above them, bold letters spelled out, "Everyone gets enough." He smiled, feeling a lump rise in his throat. She didn't fully grasp the weight of what she'd drawn, but it was clear that the message of equality was sinking in, even for someone her age. Later that evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, eating dinner, she asked, "Dad, why do some people get treated differently?" Her question caught him off guard. Kids had a way of asking the hardest questions when you least expected them. He put down his fork and looked at her, thinking carefully about how to respond. "Well," he began slowly, "sometimes people don't realize they're treating others unfairly. They might not mean to, but it still happens. And sometimes people are scared to speak up when they see something wrong. That's why it's important to say something, to let others know it's not okay." She nodded thoughtfully, chewing on her food. After a moment, she said, "So, that's what you're doing? Speaking up?" He smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing," he replied. "And you can too whenever you see something that doesn't feel right." Her innocent curiosity reminded him of how powerful conversations could be. Teaching kids to recognize fairness and unfairness wasn't just about fixing problems now. It was about preparing them to build a better future. He realized that while policies and rules mattered, so did the values passed down from one generation to the next. What he taught his daughter today could shape the kind of adult she'd become tomorrow. As the weeks went by, the community continued to rally around the cause. More parents joined the effort, sharing ideas and resources. Local businesses donated snacks and supplies to the school, ensuring no child went hungry. A nearby university even offered free workshops on cultural sensitivity for teachers and staff. These partnerships showed just how much people cared when given the chance to help, but not everyone was on board. Some teachers resisted the changes, claiming they already had enough on their plates without adding more responsibilities. Others argued that focusing too much on fairness took away from academics. At a particularly heated meeting, one veteran teacher stood up and said, "We're here to teach math and reading, not social justice." The room erupted into murmurs, some agreeing, others shaking their heads in disagreement. The man listened quietly, letting the tension simmer before speaking. When he finally stood up, his voice was calm but firm. "I understand where you're coming from," he said, addressing the teacher directly. "No one's saying your job is easy, but teaching isn't just about numbers and letters, it's about shaping lives. How can a kid focus on learning if they're worried about being treated unfairly? Fairness is part of education. It's not separate from it." His words resonated with many in the room. While not everyone agreed, the conversation opened doors to understanding. Slowly, resistance began to fade, replaced by a shared commitment to doing better for the sake of the students. Outside of school, the movement gained even more traction. News outlets picked up the story again, highlighting the community's efforts to address inequality. People from neighboring towns reached out, asking for advice on how to tackle similar issues in their own schools. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Fair Schools for All and Equality in Action, spreading awareness far beyond what anyone had imagined. The man found himself invited to speak at events, sharing his experience with larger audiences. At first, public speaking terrified him. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight. But as he stood behind podiums and microphones, looking out at crowds nodding along to his words, he realized the power of storytelling. His story wasn't unique, but it was relatable. It reminded people that change often starts with ordinary individuals taking extraordinary steps. Back home, his daughter took notice of the growing attention. One day she came to him with a shy smile and said, "People keep talking about us at school. They say you're helping a lot." He laughed softly, ruffling her hair. "We're helping," he corrected. "You're part of this too." She beamed at that, clearly proud to be included in the effort. Despite the progress, there were moments of doubt. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world felt still, he sometimes wondered if it was all worth it. Was he making a real difference? Or was he just one person shouting into the wind? On those nights, he reminded himself of the faces he'd seen. The grateful smiles of parents, the hopeful eyes of children, the determination of teachers willing to learn and grow. Those moments kept him grounded, reminding him that every action, no matter how small, mattered. One evening, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she looked up at him and asked, "Will things always be fair now?" Her question was simple, but it carried so much weight. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Probably not," he admitted. "There will always be challenges, but the more we work at it, the closer we get. And that's what counts, trying, even when it's hard." She nodded, pulling her blanket tighter around her. "Okay," she said softly. "Good night, Dad." As he turned off the light and closed her door, he felt a deep sense of purpose. This journey wasn't just about fixing a broken system. It was about teaching the next generation to dream of a world where fairness wasn't the exception, but the rule. And for now, that was enough. The months rolled on, and the changes at the school began to take root in ways no one had anticipated. What started as a simple observation about lunch portions had blossomed into something much larger, a ripple effect of awareness and action that touched nearly every corner of the community. The man noticed it everywhere he looked. Teachers greeted students with warmer smiles, parents lingered longer during drop-off to chat with each other, and even the cafeteria staff seemed more engaged, asking kids directly if they wanted seconds or needed anything else. But the journey wasn't without its growing pains. There were moments when old habits resurfaced, reminding everyone how deeply ingrained inequality could be. During one particularly frustrating week, a parent reported, overhearing a teacher make an offhand comment about certain groups being harder to teach than others. The remark spread quickly through the grapevine, reigniting tensions. Some called for immediate consequences, while others argued it was just a slip of the tongue, not malicious, but still harmful. The man found himself sitting in yet another meeting, this time focused on addressing the incident. The room buzzed with emotion as people debated what should happen next. One mother stood up, her voice trembling with anger. "It's not just one comment," she said. "It's the attitude behind it that we need to fix." Her words struck a chord with many, including him. He realized that true change wasn't just about policies or rules. It was about shifting mindsets, challenging assumptions, and fostering empathy. When it was his turn to speak, he chose his words carefully. "Look," he began, leaning forward, slightly. "We all mess up sometimes. No one's perfect. But what matters is how we respond when we're called out. Do we double down, or do we listen and learn? This isn't about punishing someone. It's about making sure everyone understands why those words hurt." His perspective helped steer the conversation toward solutions rather than blame. Together, the group decided to implement additional training sessions for teachers, focusing not just on diversity but also on active listening and conflict resolution. They also created a system where parents and students could report concerns anonymously, ensuring no one felt afraid to speak up. Outside of the school walls, the movement continued to gain momentum. Local leaders took notice, inviting the man and other advocates to present their experiences at town hall meetings. These events drew crowds of curious residents eager to understand how they could support the cause. Many walked away inspired, pledging to start similar initiatives in their own neighborhoods. It was clear that the story of one father standing up for his daughter had sparked a chain reaction, a reminder that courage could be contagious. One evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, the man sat down with his daughter to watch TV. She was flipping through channels when she stopped on a news segment featuring clips from one of the recent rallies. On screen, a reporter interviewed a young boy holding a handmade sign that read, "Equal food in equal love." The child's face lit up with pride as he explained why fairness mattered to him. His daughter gasped, pointing at the screen. "That's my friend," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with excitement. He smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. Seeing her peer step into the spotlight reminded him that children weren't just passive observers in this fight. They were active participants, capable of understanding and advocating for justice. That night, as they talked about the rally and her friend's bravery, he encouraged her to think about ways she could contribute too. "What would you want to say if you had a chance?" he asked gently. She thought for a moment before replying, "I'd tell everyone to share." Her simple answer stayed with him long after she fell asleep. Sharing, it was such a basic concept yet so powerful. Whether it was food, opportunities, or kindness, sharing was at the heart of equality. It made him reflect on how far they'd come since that first day in the cafeteria. Back then, the issue had seemed isolated, confined to one school and one meal. Now, it felt like part of a much larger conversation about fairness and humanity. As winter approached, the community came together to celebrate the progress they'd made. A special event was organized at the school, complete together families, teachers, and local officials. The gymnasium was decorated with colorful banners and balloons, creating a festive atmosphere. Students performed songs and skits about unity, while parents shared heartfelt stories of hope and resilience. At one point, the principal took the stage to thank everyone for their hard work. "Change isn't easy," he admitted, "but it's worth it. And none of this would have been possible without your voices." The man watched from the back of the room, feeling a mix of emotions, pride, relief, and a deep sense of connection to the people around him. For so long, he'd carried the weight of this fight on his shoulders. But now, looking out at the smiling faces, he realized he wasn't alone anymore. This was a collective effort, fueled by love and determination. After the event, as he walked his daughter home, she skipped ahead, humming one of the songs from the performance. When they reached their front door, she turned to him and said, "Dad, I think things are getting better." He knelt down to meet her eye level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "They are," he replied softly. "And we're helping make it happen." Inside, as he tucked her into bed, he marveled at how much she'd grown, not just physically, but emotionally. She was becoming more aware of the world around her, asking questions, noticing patterns, and forming opinions. It filled him with hope, knowing she was learning valuable lessons about fairness and compassion. These were tools she'd carry with her for life, shaping the kind of person she'd become. Later that night, as he sat in his favorite chair with a cup of tea, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He thought about the challenges they'd faced, the criticism, the setbacks, the late-night worries, and how each hurdle had only strengthened their resolve. He thought about the allies who had joined them along the way, turning a personal mission into a shared vision. And most importantly, he thought about his daughter, whose bright smile reminded him daily why this fight mattered. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would still be obstacles to overcome, biases to unlearn, and systems to improve. But for now, they were moving forward, together. As he turned off the lights and headed to bed, he whispered to himself, almost like a promise, "We're building a better world, one step at a time." The weeks that followed the community celebration felt different, lighter almost. It wasn't that all the problems had vanished, far from it, but there was a new energy in the air, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. People smiled more often, greeted each other warmly, and seemed genuinely invested in making things better. For the man, this shift was both heartening and motivating. He could see how small actions, the way a teacher bent down to listen to a student, or how cafeteria staff double-checked meal portions, were starting to add up. But life has a way of testing even the strongest resolve. Just when it felt like they were gaining ground, an unexpected challenge arose. A local newspaper ran an article questioning the legitimacy of the movement, suggesting that the claims of inequality were exaggerated for attention. The writer argued that schools already had enough on their plates without being accused of bias, implying that parents like him were overreacting. The piece sparked heated debates online, with some readers defending the school's efforts while others sided with the critic. When the man first read the article, he felt a surge of frustration. How can they twist this into something negative? He muttered under his breath, crumpling the paper in his hand. But as he calmed down, he realized that pushback like this was inevitable. Change never came without resistance, especially when it challenged deeply held beliefs or systems people took for granted. Instead of letting anger consume him, he decided to respond, not with hostility, but with clarity. He wrote a letter to the editor, keeping his tone respectful but firm. In it, he explained why fairness mattered so much, not just for his daughter but for every child who walked through the school doors. "Equality isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame," he wrote. "It's about ensuring that every kid feels valued and cared for. That's what we're working toward, a world where no one gets left behind." His words resonated with many readers, sparking a flood of supportive messages from strangers who thanked him for standing up. Meanwhile, at school, teachers and staff worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. They introduced new programs aimed at fostering inclusivity, like peer mentoring groups where older students helped younger ones navigate challenges. One initiative in particular caught the man's eye: a kindness corner set up in the library. Students could write notes of encouragement to classmates and leave them on a bulletin board. When he visited the school one afternoon, he saw his daughter adding her own note. "You're awesome just the way you are." Her smile said it all. She understood the power of lifting others up. At home, she began asking more questions about fairness and justice. One evening, as they played a board game together, she suddenly paused and asked, "Dad, why do some people think it's okay to treat others badly?" He put down the dice and looked at her, realizing once again how perceptive kids could be. "Well," he said slowly, "some people might not realize they're hurting others. Or maybe they've been taught wrong ideas and don't know any better. But that's why it's important to teach kindness. It helps change those bad habits. She nodded thoughtfully, then grinned mischievously. So if someone is mean, I should teach them how to play fair? He laughed, ruffling her hair. Exactly. And maybe show them how fun it is to share. These little moments reminded him of why he kept pushing forward. Every conversation, every act of kindness planted seeds of hope in the next generation. He knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight. It would take years, decades even. But these small victories gave him faith that progress was possible. As winter deepened, bringing frosty mornings and cozy nights, the community organized another event, a storytelling night focused on sharing personal experiences of inequality and resilience. Families gathered in the school auditorium, sipping hot cocoa and listening as speakers took turns recounting their journeys. One mother talked about how her son had been overlooked in class discussions because of his accent. Another shared how her daughter struggled to find books featuring characters who looked like her. Each story was unique, yet they all carried the same message. Everyone deserved to feel seen and heard. When it was his turn to speak, the man stood nervously at the podium, gripping the edges as he scanned the room. I didn't expect this journey to take me here, he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. All I wanted was for my kid to get the same lunch as everyone else. But along the way, I learned something bigger. That fairness isn't just about food or rules. It's about respect. It's about love. His words earned a round of applause, but what moved him most was the look in people's eyes. Eyes filled with understanding, determination, and gratitude. Afterward, several parents approached him to thank him for speaking out. You inspired us, one woman said, holding her toddler close. We didn't think we could make a difference, but now we believe we can. That belief spread beyond the school and into the wider community. Local businesses began offering discounts to families in need, while churches and community centers hosted workshops on empathy and inclusion. Even city officials took notice, pledging to review policies across all public institutions to ensure equality was prioritized. What had started as a single act of courage had grown into a movement touching countless lives. Still, the man remained grounded. He knew better than to let success go to his head. Change required constant vigilance, and there would always be setbacks. Some days, he'd wake up feeling overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the work ahead. On those mornings, he'd remind himself of his daughter's face, the way her eyes sparkled when she saw fairness in action, the way she cheered for her friends during games, the way she hugged him tightly when she felt proud of him. She was his anchor, his reason to keep fighting. One snowy afternoon, as they built a snowman in the backyard, she turned to him and said, Dad, do you think the whole world will be fair someday? He paused, considering her question. Maybe, not the whole world, he replied honestly. But we can make our little corner of it better. And if everyone does that, then the whole world starts to change. She grinned, patting the snowman's rounded belly. Okay, she said brightly. Let's start with this guy. He looks pretty happy. They laughed together, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. In that moment, surrounded by the simplicity of childhood joy, he felt a profound sense of peace. This fight wasn't just about fixing broken systems. It was about creating moments like this where love and fairness intertwined seamlessly. As dusk fell and they headed inside, brushing snow off their boots, he realized something important. The journey toward equality wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about the steps taken along the way. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every effort to include someone left out added to the tapestry of a better future. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its bumps, he was ready to walk it one step at a time with his daughter by his side. As spring arrived, the world outside seemed to mirror the changes happening within the community. The snow melted away, giving way to fresh green grass and blooming flowers. It felt symbolic, like the cold, stubborn resistance they had faced was finally thawing, making room for growth and renewal. For the man, this season brought a mix of reflection and hope. He looked back on everything that had transpired since that fateful day in the cafeteria and marveled at how far they'd come, not just as individuals, but as a collective force for good. One sunny morning, he received an invitation to speak at a regional education conference. At first he hesitated. Public speaking still made him nervous, and he wasn't sure what he could offer that others hadn't already said. But then he thought about his daughter, about all the kids who deserved fairness, and he realized his story mattered. It wasn't polished or perfect, it was real, raw, and relatable. So with a deep breath, he accepted the invitation. The day of the conference arrived, and as he stood backstage waiting for his turn, he felt a strange mix of nerves and excitement. The auditorium buzzed with energy, filled with teachers, parents, and policymakers eager to learn from one another. When his name was called, he walked onto the stage, squinting slightly under the bright lights. As he began to speak, his voice wavered at first, but soon it grew steady, carried by the weight of his conviction. "I didn't set out to start a movement," he admitted, looking out at the sea of faces. "I just wanted my kid to be treated fairly. But along the way, I learned something important, that fairness isn't just about fixing one problem. It's about building a foundation where everyone has a chance to thrive." He went on to share the highs and lows of their journey, emphasizing the importance of persistence, collaboration, and empathy. By the time he finished, the audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. Afterward, dozens of people approached him to shake his hand or share their own stories. A teacher from a neighboring town told him how inspired she was to implement similar changes in her school. A father tearfully thanked him for giving him the courage to address bias in his child's classroom. These interactions reminded him of why he kept pushing forward. Every effort, no matter how small, created ripples that reached farther than he ever imagined. Back home, life continued its rhythm. His daughter thrived, her confidence growing with each passing day. She started standing up for classmates when she noticed unfairness, whether it was someone being left out of a game or teased for their accent. Watching her take these steps filled him with pride. He knew she was learning not just to receive kindness, but to give it freely. At school, the changes became part of the fabric of daily life. Teachers incorporated lessons on equality into their curriculum, using books and activities to spark discussions about fairness and respect. Cafeteria staff took ownership of ensuring equal portions, often going above and beyond to make sure every child felt cared for. Even the principal, once hesitant, now championed the cause, regularly checking in with parents and students to gauge progress. But perhaps the most profound change was in the relationships between families. Parents who had once kept to themselves now formed bonds over shared goals. They organized potlucks, playdates, and volunteer days, creating a sense of unity that extended beyond school walls. The man found himself surrounded by a network of support, people who believed in the same vision of fairness and inclusion. It was a reminder that no fight had to be fought alone, that strength came from standing together. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, his daughter joined him, plopping down beside him with her favorite stuffed bear, the one he'd given her during that first visit. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Dad," she said softly, "do you think we'll always have to work this hard?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Probably not," he said honestly. "Things will get easier as more people understand why fairness matters. But even when things improve, we'll still need to keep paying attention, because fairness isn't something you achieve once, it's something you practice every day." She nodded, seeming satisfied with his answer. After a pause, she added, "I'm glad we're doing this together." Her words caught him off guard, filling him with a warmth that spread through his chest. "Me too, kiddo," he replied, wrapping an arm around her. "Me too." In the quiet moments like these, he allowed himself to feel proud, not just of what they'd accomplished, but of who they were becoming. This journey had taught him so much, about resilience, about the power of community, and about the boundless potential of love. He saw it in his daughter's laughter, in the smiles of grateful parents, and in the determination of teachers striving to do better. It was proof that change was possible when hearts opened and hands reached out. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, he realized something else. The fight for fairness wasn't just about fixing systems or policies. It was about nurturing humanity, the shared belief that everyone deserved to be valued, respected, and loved. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, he knew they were ready to face them, together. That night, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes and whispered, "You're my hero, Dad." He chuckled softly, brushing a kiss on her forehead. "No, sweetheart," he said. "You're mine." And with that he turned off the light, closing the door behind him, knowing that their story, one of courage, compassion, and connection, was just beginning.